Welcome back to another CrescoFin video. I'm joined once again by Robert from CrescoFin, and this time we have Ryan Adams and David Hoffman, co-founders of Bankless Nation. Guys, great to have you on today's interview. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
Thanks a lot, Jessica.
Thanks. And guys, happy Thanksgiving weekend as well. I know that you've taken some time out of the festive season to join, which makes it even more grateful to hop on in. How are you guys celebrating right now?
I got dinner with my friends and family, and then got onto a Zoom with like my extended family, and so it was a pretty populated Zoom. So really using the technology to work around the obstacles of today.
A busy Zoom day. What about you?
Yeah, so I somehow convinced my family to do like this outdoor Thanksgiving socially distanced thing. So we took over our neighborhood common area, and we set up chairs and tables and the full Thanksgiving spread, and pretty exhausted from that, honestly. So it's good to have some downtime this weekend too, but we got it done. Did Thanksgiving. So
Oh, that's really cool though. You haven't been dissuaded by the virus.
yeah. Well, we try to adapt within the the constraints that we had. So it was a different Thanksgiving, but hopefully this will be the only one of these that we collectively go through.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. And there's something else that we have in common now, which is why we're having this kind of downtime, is we're here to have a discussion on kind of CrescoFin and their movements, but also the thing that we all have in common as well, which is kind of the phrases Robert's put in some of our other interviews, which is like, banks suck. It's like,
Yes.
And I'd love to start with you guys, Ryan, maybe when it comes to founding Bankless Nation, how did that come about?
Yeah, it's so, first of all, it all starts with kind of the crypto journey. And it's funny you mentioned Thanksgiving, because I got into crypto on one Thanksgiving 6 years ago. So a friend of mine was talking about Bitcoin mining, and I was fascinated by it, like printing money without a bank in your own home. Like, how do you do that? How does that work? And I, had sort of entrepreneur by background. I was in healthcare tech, so I had a very busy job during the week, but I had this Thanksgiving piece of time where I could really research it. And so I spent I had Thanksgiving, a meal on Thursday, and then I spent Friday, and then that turned into Saturday, and that turned into Sunday, just getting my head wrapped around Bitcoin. And I came away from that thinking, wow, this is absolutely world-changing technology, right? The ability to have a money system without any banks. And that was super fascinating to me. And then a few years later, I discovered Ethereum, and that kind of flipped the entire idea on its head, because not only could you have a peer-to-peer transfer system without a bank, you could actually develop entire banking services like lending, like borrowing, like trading without any commercial banks. And you could make them programmable. So it was all digital. And so at that point in time, after Ethereum, it was kind of a 1-2 combo punch. And I wanted to dedicate the next decade at least to this world and this technology, just to explore it. And I got into kind of Bankless and sort of, set up the newsletter and worked with David on the podcast to start generating content, because I felt like it was the core of crypto. It was the reason I got into Bitcoin 6 years ago. This whole idea of having a money system without intermediaries, peer to peer. And to me, Ethereum and DeFi was the absolute best representation of that. And I knew it was just going to be absolutely world-changing technology. So David and I started Bankless during the depths of the bear market, when everyone thought DeFi was not a thing and Ethereum was dead. And we started building the nation from there. So it's partially, I think we did it, David, because we were a little bit like pissed off that no one else was talking about this, like obviously world-changing technology. So we started it, from there, and we grew kind of a community and a collective of folks who were going on the same journey that we are. So it's been super exciting. Every day is different. That's for sure.
I love that phrase as well, is like the Ethereum is dead phrase, because if you go on Bitcoin obituaries, I think Bitcoin in the media has died around 300 times by now. And weirdly, we're all still here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was really fascinating. David, what about you? How did you get involved and how did you guys interact? Because you guys mentioned off air that you never actually met in person, but you work in a very close unit now.
Yeah, my story kind of started pretty similarly to Ryan. I came in after him in 2017, and I got pulled in by the world of mining. And so I was on my way to grad school trying to figure out how I was going to help pay for student loans. And I discovered that I had this computer that could produce like $4 to $5 a day mining this thing called Ethereum. And, big question marks over my head, but like $4 to $5 a day passive income is not something to ignore. And so I doubled down on that. And I ended up having just like, 4 different like mining computers like spread across my dad's house. And we didn't pay like a cent in heating for that winter. And that kind of got me, I had my skin in the game, right? And so I had to learn what this whole Ethereum thing was. And that kind of just spiraled out of control. Instead of like learning about like physical therapy and studying for the GRE to go to grad school, I ended up just like reading white papers, like watching Vitalik YouTube videos. And then that got me into the ETH Denver 2018 hackathon, which I really didn't know what I was going to do there, but I was just really curious. And turns out like around this whole Ethereum thing is this massive just culture of people who are all seeing the power of Ethereum from 1,000 different angles, right? And so after spending 2 to 3 days at ETH Denver, I just knew it is like the community that is arising around this technology was a community that I felt I fit in at, right? I wanted to be a part of, like I resonated with it. And again, I didn't really know how to contribute. Like I wasn't a coder, like I'm not a business person. So I just started like doing what I knew how to do, which was to write. And so I started writing, and that kind of just spiraled into further and further writing because people liked to read it. And that's how Ryan and I started engaging with each other. Was Ryan would read some of my articles, and then we would start chatting about it, and then we chatted more about it. And then we chatted more about it. And then all of a sudden, like we found ourselves in the same Telegram groups and the same Discord channels and on like tweeting at each other all the time. And that's kind of how the relationship formed. And then we realized that we are producing like some of the most content in Ethereum and DeFi, and people really, really appreciated all of that content. And so then we created Bankless.
Awesome. It's probably one of the hardest jobs as well, actually, is you can be a coder and you know what you have to do, but to have to write and put everything in context for new people that are entering the space, it is a challenge, and you guys have done fantastic at that. And that's how I know Robert is kind of coming to know you guys as well. Robert, Tunisia, how did you get involved in crypto kind of eventually? Just give us your quick story as well.
Well, I'd say, first of all, Jessica, that I think where Ryan and David come from is the most important place, which is like disruption is going to come from the outside. It's rare that an industry disrupts itself. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't newspaper people who disrupted, the newspaper industry. It's outsiders who think of a different way of like operating. So, it's also like anything new requires explanation. So you need the media company essentially that like, Ryan and David have created, to educate people, because it's a core part of it is education. So, for me, I mean, I was a former banker, I'm taking, pills and shots and stuff like that to get over it. But I was like, when I was a young guy, I was like right out of my master's degree at business school. And I wrote my thesis on valuing companies in emerging markets. I ended up in Moscow, and my global bank was advising on a loan essentially to a large Russian company. And, in the subsidiary, there was say like a value of 5, and we were making a loan of 100. And I just, as a young guy, I was curious. I was like, so I kept asking, like, how do we make this loan? And finally, the treasurer said, look, Robert, we create a loan account, and that's our asset. And then we create a deposit account, and I type the numbers in on my screen, and that's the money. And I'm like, you have to be kidding me. It's like, I felt like calling my attorney and getting my money back for my undergrad. It's like that's not what it's taught, like that, in economics. So that got me thinking about hard money, which is Bitcoin. And then I moved on to kind of, it was a couple of years ago living in Switzerland, interest rates went negative. And I went to my bank and they said, look, we're going to have to start charging you like 75 basis points, like 0.75% on your money in the bank. And I was like, people don't like their people don't like their banks anyway. I mean, it's just outrageous. So all I could think of is like, you know, I'm going to get some people together and like find out some way to go around the bank. I mean, you know, so that's where for me, that's where Bankless came up, and that's the origin of the company.
Very cool. So guys, do you have the similar approach then when it comes to Robert's perception of kind of the banking system and the structure that I guess everyone knows from different parts of the world? The amazing thing is we're all calling from different locations at the moment, probably with different context or financial history, but I think everyone right now is in a similar situation when we're in this industry, which is like a little bit of frustration at the current financial system and this kind of rat race that people are perceived to be on when it comes to savings and a savings account and that uphill struggle. What's your guys' take? Maybe we could start with you, Ryan.
Yeah, wow. Where do we even start with the failings of the banking system? There's so many we can get into, right? So one of course is the central banking system, and this I guess tendency to keep on issuing currency, right? The modern monetary policy is to continue to issue. We've got sovereign debt at all-time highs. The only way for countries to get out of this is to continue to inflate their own currencies. That is kind of a failing in and of itself, and it all flows downstream. But I think that banks are failing us from all sorts of different levels. Even if you think about from a technology perspective, right? Like all of these banks are essentially, they're just ledgers. But they're all private ledgers that are essentially sanctioned by the government. So it's a small cabal. It's a insiders group and an insiders game. And so if you want to build something on top of, say, a fintech company like a PayPal on top of this legacy infrastructure, there is so much work, so many hoops to go through. So like even from a technology perspective, tapping into all of the different databases that you need. So I guess the bottom line is Bankless can disintermediate all of that. DeFi and crypto is making it so that we don't need these intermediaries in the middle. They're providing in many ways negative value adds. You take something like the Uniswap protocol, right? They developed, one single developer on a $100,000 grant, deployed a smart contract on Ethereum. This is now the third largest crypto exchange in the world. They're doing 4 billion in volume per week. He didn't need to ask anyone's permission in order to create this protocol. It's very simple. Just, like not more than thousands of lines of code, essentially. It can't be shut down. It's global. Anyone in the world can access it at any point in time. Like even exchanges and banks themselves can start using it, right? So it's this type of permissionless, transformative innovation. One thing that always digs me is, people talk about crypto being sort of early and DeFi user experience as being hard. And I think there's some validity to that, right? There is a learning curve. You have to store your private keys. Bankless helps with that. But in so many ways, the Bankless user experience is 10 times better, 100 times better. I mean, for instance, I think it's really bad user experience when I go to my Wells Fargo bank and I have money in a savings account and I'm getting near 0% interest on my savings account. Like you talk about user experience, that is bad user experience. Whereas in DeFi, I can get 4%, 8%, 10% in various ways. If I go to my bank, my local bank, and I try to send money to you, Robert, they take all of this information down, they collect it from me, right? And I have to present a driver's license, all of this various material. With my bank, I actually have to go in person, right? I have to talk to somebody to wire funds from one place to another. And it doesn't get there, for 48 hours. And they charge me $30 for that, right? Whereas in DeFi world, in Bankless world, I could just send you any amount of funds, with a click of a button, essentially. So I do think this Bankless user experience is disintermediating the traditional financial system, and is essentially going to do what the internet did to big media companies. So yeah, it's like a ton going on from that perspective, and really world-changing stuff.
Amazing, thank you. And David, because we're kind of, now that we're on this topic, I want to see if you've got anything to add, and also kind of throw another question in the mix, which is kind of the phrase going bankless. Is that something that you view right now that is achievable for people in the coming short term?
Well, it always depends on your preferred level of risk tolerance, because while this is cutting edge technology with better features and better incentives to use it, it is still new. However, is it possible? Absolutely. And that's because like I do it myself, right? Like my Wells Fargo account holds like less than 1% of my savings, right? And I think that's a kind of a unique thing to do for people in America, maybe because we have like the best sort of financial infrastructure in the world. But for people outside of America, especially people in Argentina, like going bankless is actually using crypto economic protocols like Bitcoin and Ethereum is just intuitive. It just makes sense. Like you don't actually have to work very hard to convince them to do that. And so it really depends around your local environment about like how well financialized your jurisdiction is. But I think it's something that, you know, everyone can do today if they will it, and tomorrow it will be even easier. And just to add on to what Ryan was saying, like the whole purpose of Bitcoin is to replace the central bank with code, right? To replace the money supply with code. And that's because humans are messy. Like we have sometimes maligned incentives. Sometimes we do things that we really shouldn't have done. Sometimes we flub some numbers. Sometimes we make mistakes. We're messy. We're messy creatures. Code isn't messy. Code is code. Like code stays the same. Code you can rely on, right? And so when Ryan and I were, you know, in the depths of the bear market talking about like why we thought DeFi was so awesome, Bankless and banks are like the archetype of an intermediary, right? If there was one monolithic intermediary, it would be a bank. Now we would have called it intermediary-less, but that doesn't flow off the tongue as well. So we call it bankless. But the whole thesis that we have about DeFi is that like in the same way you can rely on code with Bitcoin, DeFi, you can take any intermediary and make a DeFi version of it, a version of that intermediary that runs on code. And that's why Ryan and I are really interested in what CrescoFin is doing, is because they're like gutting out the whole human bureaucracy part of the back end of a bank, and they're replacing it with DeFi infrastructure, which is something that we think that is just extremely compelling, both from just creating a better product, but also creating a better experience. And it's also just where the world is going to go. And so CrescoFin's doing it first. And so it's extending the values of the entire crypto ecosystem and making it relevant to their specific use case. And I just think that's going to be the future of the next 10 to 20 years.
Absolutely. And even the phrase of the slogan of CrescoFin is replacing banking with code. So it's literally everything that you have summarized is the vision. So Robert, talk us to the vision then for people that aren't familiar with CrescoFin. I know that David's given a great summary there, but just to hear from your side of things as well.
Well, actually, in really simple terms, if you're a reader of Bankless, if you follow Bankless, you listen to their podcasts, you support the idea of like self-sovereign money and choosing your own path in life. I mean, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to implement that. And we're doing it in a very simple way. And that is essentially to give savers the opportunity to earn more on their money. And that's by cutting out the bank. And you could argue that this has been an idea for a while. Like back in the mid-90s, Bill Gates said banks are dinosaurs. But banks are still alive and well today. I mean, the psychological advantage that banks have is they seem safe. They seem like a very traditional, ordinary, safe place to put your money, right? That's why they're designed to look like fortresses. And that's why bankers are boring and they have gray hair and they wear suits. And, this is what technology needs to challenge. And it hasn't been possible until the advent of Ethereum to actually do that. So, Bitcoin is hard for me. Bitcoin's hard money. Ethereum is essentially the smart contract. It's the ability to build beyond just the money layer. It's able to do, like Ryan was saying, the different financial products. So, that's our idea. And what we have to add to that, what you have to add to the technology, in addition to the user experience a little bit, is you need to add insurance. So that's what we've done. I mean, we add insurance to kind of neutralize the bank's psychological advantage of being a safe place to put your money. And when most people talk about, going down the rabbit hole, what they mean is really understanding that banks aren't that safe. And actually the banking system and central banks isn't a very good way for us to organize ourselves. Actually, it's kind of dangerous. A much better way to do it is being able to do it in a matched way, essentially a peer-to-peer way, which is enabled by Ethereum. So that's what we did. When the bank said we're going to start charging you to have your money in the bank, we thought that's when we came up with the idea that banks suck and we're going to build on Ethereum and we're going to cut out the bank. And but by doing that, by building on Ethereum, cutting out the bank, applying insurance to it, we're able to deliver like 3% return to savers, which is like, and that's insured. That's 100% insured. So, in many ways, what we're doing is applying really tangibly the ways, the things that are discussed on Bankless. And it just wouldn't be possible without the technology, but also the regulation. It's a real benefit to being based in Switzerland, where the regulation is very clear, very supportive of crypto. I mean, I do get some funny looks at when I meet people and I say my objective is to replace banking with code, because there's banks in every corner here in Switzerland. So I'm going to lose a lot of friends, maybe physically here in Switzerland, but I'm hoping to make some friends up in bankless communities around the world.
Well, it's funny that you said actually that there's a benefit of you being in Switzerland, because Ryan, you made reference to having interest rates at near zero, whereas in certain parts of Europe they're actually in the negative. So there's kind of pros and cons depending on which country of the world people are located in. And if we look right now, and I know I asked David this kind of a little bit earlier on the kind of the future being bankless, but I'd love to ask you all what you think that it kind of seems almost like a utopia now, what it would look like, what a bankless world would look like, where people do have these removed boundaries that we and people that are more maybe kind of libertarian in the crypto world have identified.
I think there's certain things about it that we can see now, and we can see the seeds of now, right? And there are other things about it, just like the early internet, that are beyond prediction and are way cooler than anything we could actually think up. So use cases that haven't actually been imagined yet. But I think one thing that's super important and fundamental, one thing that's not going to change, is we may not need banks, all of us, but we do need banking, right? We need the service of banking. So some of the things that Robert was mentioning that CrescoFin is bringing to market, like insurance. We need the deposits that we make in our savings accounts or in our lending accounts to be insured. We need money verbs, the things that we do on a day-to-day basis or to transact with each other, like the ability to send, transfer, the ability to borrow, the ability to lend, the ability to trade, the ability to take out margin, eventually things like credit on top of maybe our reputation, on top of some collateral that we have. We need all of these banking services. But with Bankless, they're going to exist in a different way. With DeFi, they're not going to be wholly dependent on these large legacy banking institutions that require thousands and thousands of employees and like corporate executive teams and massive margins who are kind of taking a large piece. I think like in the US anyway, the financial sector is absolutely massive, like double digits in terms of the GDP it consumes. And the question is, do we get that value from the banks, right? So in small ways, we're already seeing it. We're seeing people like David, myself, the Bankless Nation, they are taking their money out of existing banking solutions, banking their brokerage accounts and out of their savings accounts and checkings accounts. And they are moving it across the bridge into this new DeFi world, into this bankless world. And we always talk about two different like flippings that happen, if you will, right? The first is you become more bankless when you have more of your net worth in crypto in some form than you have it in traditional finance, right? That's the first like flipping that happens on the Bankless journey. And the second is this: you wake up and you realize, oh my God, I don't even need my traditional bank account anymore. And you either put it on life support or you just shut it down completely, right? Most in the Bankless journey have had at least one of those flippings, and more are happening. So a lot of this is happening, Jessica, from like the bottom up. It's like people, individuals who are realizing, hey, if I'm playing the banking game, I'm getting the raw end of the deal, and I want better service. I want higher interest. I want more self-sovereignty. I want some of the things that CrescoFin is providing. Some of these other DeFi protocols are happening. So that's like bottom up. But then what I think is going to happen is we trash the banks a lot, you know, in some ways, because they're big, slow monoliths. They don't quite get it yet. But some of them will, I think. So some of them, I think, will start to realize that there's potential for them to build on top of these DeFi protocols as well. I see maybe fintech moving on this first. So you've got like fintech companies like PayPal, for instance, and Square, and they're already starting to invest in crypto protocols, right, as on-ramps. So one other trend that I think we'll see in the next 5 years, and we're already starting to see an acceleration of this, is the fintech companies with good user experience and good user acquisition will start to essentially substitute out their plumbing, their traditional banking plumbing, for DeFi protocols and for crypto protocols, and start to onboard more people. So we've got bottom up, and then we've got some top down, and it kind of all meets in the middle. And then we've got some really interesting startups that are bridging the gap, like CrescoFin, to make this world happen sooner. So all of these things together, it's going to be a wild 10 years. Some things we can predict, some things we can't, but the overall prediction is we will need less banks by the end of this decade. That for sure, I can tell you.
I'd like to build on that as well. A lot of people in the crypto space talk about crypto anarchy, which kind of puts like a bad image into people's head. Kind of gives you like this Mad Max type vibe. But I think what me and Ryan are really big on is the inverse of that, which is crypto civilization, right? Where we can create a world global society that runs on some of this code-based infrastructure. And this is kind of where we got into the metaphor of the bankless nation, where we kind of realized that, you know, as more and more people are coordinating around these same similar protocols, right? If we're all using Bitcoin, if we're all using Ethereum to coordinate our capital, coordinate our trust, then all of a sudden we've created this internet-based, internet-scale organizational tool to allow anyone to coordinate with each other. And the whole point of a nation state like the United States or any other nation is to be able to coordinate separated people, right? Somebody in Seattle can coordinate with somebody in Florida. They're 3,000 miles away, but yet they still abide by the same rules. And that's the goal of a nation state, is to scale up the coordination as far as possible. But I think in 2020, we've seen a lot of distrust in institutions, you know, failures in trust across the world. And so to me, what that tells me is that we need new institutions to deposit our trust into, right? And I think that the lack of trust that has been found in the world is going to be, that problem is going to be answered by protocols on Ethereum, DeFi protocols. Bitcoin is that instantiated, and then Ethereum can make that scale out to everything else.
Mm-hmm. I think that like, you know, David and Ryan have got it absolutely right. And, you know, but it's not just kind of theoretical, and it's not just, you know, individuals on, you know, on different chat groups or discords. Like I see that tangibly in real life. If you take institutions, for example, our early adopters of our product, because we have about 125 million Swiss francs on deposit with us, all from institutions, and they're all family offices, which, you know, Jessica, we were discussing with Real Vision are typically early adopters, and they're the ones that are principals. Like it's really their money. They're not acting as an agent. So just like Derek and I, just like my co-founder, they're also pissed off at the banks, and they're looking for a solution. Like, you know, the only people who love banks are bankers. But when you go to, like, you know, family offices or asset managers, they also are not making any money on their cash part of their portfolio. So they're very open for alternatives. And, like, you know, at some of our meetings, like we've said, like, okay, we can go into the details, like we're built on this tech stack. It's a new tech stack. It's Ethereum. It's like, you know, and you can go into all those details. But at the end of the day, you know, my partner often says, look, it's 3%, it's in US dollars, it's insured. How much do you want? And, you know, it's the thing is the problem we have in the crypto community is you know, most of us love technology. We're very tech focused and you want to get into the weeds, all the details of it. The users, like we were saying with Damien Horner, they want the benefits. They want to know what the benefits are. And there's been a decade of a war on savers. You know, like Ryan's absolutely right about like central banks. Where are they taking this value from? Well, they take it from, you know, taxpayers, of course, but also savers, right? You used to be able to live off of like some interest income. And that's what we're trying to do. But actually, if you build on like a public open blockchain and you combine that with our matched formula and like cutting out the banks, you can easily make like 3%. And that's after insurance. And, you know, we even take like, you know, I mean, it proves it works in the real world because we took our concept to the Lloyd's market in London. It's like the largest and oldest insurance market in the world. It's famous for insuring like, you know, like ships and stuff like that. And, you know, after you explain it to people, like they really got it and they like it and they write insurance on the back of it. I mean, that's why we really think this model, I mean, is, you know, I know that Ryan and David, they're very close to kind of individual users. And from my perspective, I think 2020, you know, 2021, you're going to see huge adoption by institutions, which is just driven by looking for more returns, but that are not too risky. And you know, Ryan makes a good point about protocols as well, because there's a nice match. For example, like we're taking our insured collateral and we're creating a money market on Aave, and we've got Stani on board as an advisor as well. And it's the possibilities. It's the Legos, as they call it, right? It's not a silo. You can actually like tap into other things throughout the ecosystem. And that is what's going to end up delivering an enormous amount of value to users.
And David, on the topic of kind of Bankless, because obviously you're based in Geneva and you've mentioned a little bit earlier on in today's show that it is kind of the banking capital of the world, every corner you go to. And I used to live in Geneva as well. It was a Swiss bank haven. What's the approach there when it comes to this kind of bankless alternative? Is there any kind of proactive approach there, or is it something which is a bit of a taboo word that shouldn't be spoken out loud?
So did you mean that to me or to?
Oh, sorry, Robert.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, that is the truth. It is true in Geneva, but you know, it's also full of wealth managers who are looking for returns. So yeah, there's a lot of banks, but there's also, I mean, there's a lot of people who are not attached to their bank. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, if you design a product like ours, and that's why I'm really excited that, you know, Ryan and David have joined us. Like it's really revolutionary because it's so different. And that's where you get widespread technology adoption. Like by building on this new technology stack, I just don't think that fintechs and banks can compete because they're built on an old siloed database stack. And it's just very different when you build on Ethereum. So, you know, our advantage is that, you know, we combine it with insurance. And I think that answers a lot of the concerns that people have. I think if it wasn't insured and you had to explain what Ethereum was, like, I mean, and get people to trust Ethereum, like I trust it completely, and the insurance company trusts it, which is amazing. So, you know, it just answers a lot of those questions. And, you know, the whole bankless concept, like I was at a meetup the other day here in Geneva, and it was online, of course, because of the, you know, the lockdown. And a guy came on his screen, and this is in French, and he's like a student at a local university, and he's got a little black flag on his, like, by his name. And I kept looking at it, and I'm like, what's the black flag? He's like, oh, it's like, you know, it's a bankless. I'm part of the Bankless club at my local university here in Switzerland. It's amazing. There's a Bankless France where they've adopted the slogan from the from the football or from the soccer team, Allez Bankless. I mean, it's really quite funny. You realize these communities, these bankless communities are popping up everywhere. Even, you know, we talked to Diane Dye from Dodo, and I asked her where she gets her news, and she's like, "Oh, I subscribe to Bankless." So anyway, I'm counting on like Ryan and David also kind of spreading the word and creating these bankless communities, which will hopefully adopt our product.
Well, that's why this is so powerful. What you guys are doing and what we're all collectively doing. It's even more than just us. It's a movement, because whether it's individuals or it's institutions, people ask me often like, okay, like we see crypto, lots of cool things going on, but it's still a niche. When mainstream? And I think what CrescoFin is tapping into is the way to mainstream this, or a way to mainstream this, which is with monetary expansion, the direction that it's going, there's not going to be any such thing as a high yield savings interest account anytime soon. In fact, we're likely going negative. You mentioned much of Europe is in the negative. Well, America's going there too. The entire world is going to go there. And this is not a short-term thing. We're talking years and years of this.
Systemic.
Where can you get high yield savings accounts in an insured way? Well, it may be the case that the only place you can actually access that sort of thing is in DeFi, is in crypto. And when you could start boiling it down to, as your partner says, Robert, like to institutions, like you don't have to understand you don't have to understand all the technical details here. You just have to understand a few things. 3% insured, how much do you want to send us, right? That's really easy for people to wrap their minds around. And that's going to start mainstreaming these DeFi tools. And then like mainstream isn't just a matter of individuals. That's very important that we have a large set of individuals. But the size of financial markets are dictated by the amount of capital. And CrescoFin is just like onboarding 125 million CHF in capital. I mean, that's huge. But that's also just the start. So this is where we start to see the mainstreaming of DeFi, when we have these bridges that are easy to understand and that provide a service that people want, and the entire world is going to want some sort of high yield, insured, interest-bearing account. Everyone's going to want that for like the next 5 years at least into the future. That's how we mainstream this thing, I think. It's an important work.
It's great that I feel good when Ryan says that's a lot, that's huge, because in Switzerland people look at me and like, that's nothing, But come on, we just started, give me a break. My partner and I tested the system. We built it, we paid for everything ourselves. We tested the system with our own money since the 1st of October 2019. And so we opened to like Swiss institutions in the spring. And we're really happy. We've had some really good results. But a lot of the early stage stuff is like tied to education. That's why Bankless does such a good job. And in speaking to a number of the people who put money with us, it just provokes interesting discussion, right? Like you can actually put your money to work, not through a bank, and make a return on it. Like that's something for people here in Switzerland to get their minds around. But this is their day job, right? Their day job is to get another basis point or two. So when you offer them an amazing return, they're super excited about it. But it just generates some funny conversations. Like one guy's like, well, blockchain, we don't put our money into something like that, like newfangled, whatever, that we don't understand. And his partner turned to him and he's like, what do you mean? He's like, look at that watch on your wrist. You don't understand how that works. I mean, you watch Netflix, don't you? You don't know how like that's, the guy was like, you don't know how that's like streamed in packets over the, transport layer of the internet. The guy's like, I guess that's true. And then, but for us, like in crypto, I think we love the technology almost too much. It needs to be explained in a really clear, simple way, which is what, David and Ryan do. And it's really, really healthy. But, like our CTO, amazing guy, like just, brilliant. But he hates it when we come up with things like, banks suck. Here's our alternative. Crypto's better, because he wants to get into all those details. But what you really need to do is you need to use those to show the benefits to users. And that's why Ethereum, that's why crypto is so amazing. That's why it will completely change finance, because it's the benefits. It's just so much better for people. So.
So now, guys, I don't want to keep you too long because I know it is Thanksgiving weekend. So just finally, for people that maybe do want to go and see more from Ryan and David, where can they go for Twitter handles to hear some of your podcasts? Where can they go to hear more?
Yeah, so you can go to bankless.substack.com, and that's the Bankless newsletter. Subscribe there. We also have the Bankless HQ Twitter handle, or myself, I'm at Ryan S. Adams on Twitter. And David, you are at Trustless State, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And then wherever you get your podcasts, you can find Bankless, and also on YouTube as well.
Fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. And finally, Robert, for anyone that wants to hear more about CrescoFin, where can they go to hear some more information?
Yeah, Jessica, so the site's defi.crescofin.ch. So it was really cool talking with you. Thanks guys for taking the time on a Thanksgiving weekend.
Oh, of course. We'll never pass up the opportunity to talk about Ethereum. So
absolutely. All day, every day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.